menopause happens in women, and no one says, oh, but that's natural. That's bullshit.
Your clinic is dealing with menopause and aging females, and I want you to really give the audience some very specific things about this.
The later a woman goes through menopause, the longer they generally tend to live.
What is it specifically that a woman should be looking for? Like before something happens?
Well, there's a few. The problem you've got to be really careful about is...
So we are here on the first episode of our rebranded podcast, Age Defiantly, formerly Performance Driven Living. And we're also in our new studio. If you notice, things look different. This is home base now, so we're excited about that. And I'm excited to have a guest with us today to talk about probably a topic that would be arguably pretty close to home for a lot of people, probably not talked about much, to be honest with you, but for an aging community, a very important conversation for us to have. And I want to welcome Zack Varkaris is with me today, but wanted to have this conversation because you speak a lot about, I'll say, hormonal dysfunction as we age. And I intentionally use the word dysfunction, Zack, because I think that one of the subjects that I can't stand is when people talk about the phrase. I mean, anybody who listens to this podcast knows that there's three words I hate. And those are the three words, at your age, because we have somehow as a society decided that decline is normal. And we've decided that there are points at life that degradation should just be normal and we should accept it. And my argument here on Age Defiantly, if that doesn't say enough, is that we don't need to accept that aging is, of course, chronological. And aging also has a physiological and biological component to it, agreed. But the idea that we accept stuff way sooner than we absolutely should, that there is an opportunity for us to live abundantly way into our later life and not accept this rapid decline. I pulled some statistics while we were sitting here waiting, and this actually makes me sad. So if this is anybody who's listening to this, only 70% of men remain sexually active in their 50s. 30% of men aren't even sexually active after the age of 50. Only 50 to 60% past 60. And only 30% of men are sexually active past 70. I'm like, that's crazy to me. But it gets even weirder because for women, those numbers are even worse. That you're talking 60% of women are active sexually over 50. 40 to 50% over 60, and only 20-ish% of women are sexually active over 70 years old. And a lot of that relates to libido, a lot of that relates to multiple other things, but you're the expert. You've recently written a book on longevity. You specialize in this type of hormonal and rejuvenation. I'll let you explain that to the audience. But talk to me about that, because as we age, of course, that's something we take for granted when we're young, and then all of a sudden it's not a problem until it's a problem.
Yeah, but very true. Okay, so first thing, for your three words that you know, at your age, my three words is I love haters, so it's okay. So okay, but basically. Okay, thank you for that, and very kind introduction. Yes, I've written a book, and it's called The Three Laws of Longevity, and we can go into that later. But what we've done is, as a group of people, we created a company, Austin Biotech, and we looked at longevity. And like you say, we are victims of our own circumstance. We're told, you must do this. This is what you must do. You act your age, behave this way. Even as a child, as a very large, tall child. So they'll say, act your age, Zachy, or Zach, no, we can call me Zachy or something. And it was like, or Zachary. And it would be like, but I'm only 8 years old. I just look like I was 12, you know? So people make assumptions, and that's, you know, a viewpoint. And what we did is we looked at what causes what we felt was aging. Now, we have to look into things in context. Back in the day, 100 years ago even, the average lifespan was 65, 62. So you were basically done and dusted at 55, 60, done. But also, you didn't do as much education or there wasn't as much, and many things to learn. There were no cell phones, there were no internet, there was no different types of things you had to learn, which you now have to learn. So it takes you longer to become an adult now. I mean, before you were having children at 16, a quinceañera at 15, if you were, those sort of coming of age. Now you're a child. So therefore, would it not stand to reason that you should therefore be adult longer as well? Well, that's not natural, I hear people say. Well, that's not true. It's because what is natural? That's what we perceive it to be. So we looked at the bodily functions and what caused aging and sort of not to try and live to 500, but just to sort of max out the 125. Just keep 120. Let's keep it simple.
120 is hard to find, all right, because I think that's very healthy age.
It's a realistic number.
Right.
It's not like flying to the moon in one leap and bound. It's realistic. It's achievable with what we have available to us today. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's achievable.
I want to put a pin in that statement because I want to get back to something about that. But go back.
So fundamentally, we look at this, okay, well, let's look at this logically. What happens? And so what happened was people ask me how I got into this. And it's a great question in the sense of I was in my mid-40s. I was living at the Light Reserve Beach by my suppose you want the weather. I was surfing in the Philippines. I met my wife. She was 40. Bang, she gets pregnant instantaneously. Of course. Like, oh my God, pregnant. And then everyone said, well, that's unusual. She's 40. So what? What's the big deal? I'm worrying about it. She didn't look 40. Admittedly, she looked a lot younger. That's not the point. The point was she was. And then the doctor says, oh, you've got to check her for arrhythmic heartbeat. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. You've got to have, I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And I have a background in biology. I'm a molecular marine biologist. It's not like I didn't have the training. And we looked at it and we realized that a lot of people had problems. And it was about sexual function and reproduction. Now let's think about it. What makes you a man or what makes a woman a woman? It's basically the ability that you can then release or share your DNA to breed the next generation. So we looked at that and said, well, what is this issue? And, suddenly we saw that menopause happens in women and no one says, oh, well, that's natural. Well, really? Name me another species that has menopause. Do you think has a bunch? Out of curiosity, would you have an idea?
I don't.
Would you say monkeys have menopause? Or
I honestly never looked into that. I don't know the answer. I mean, I can look it up here.
Sure. But just I want you to think about it. So fundamentally, the reality is there are only 5 species that have it. And the other 4 are all marine. They're whales, dolphins, killer whales, so on and so forth. So why don't apes have it? Why don't gorillas, our closest related organisms, have that? No one knows the answer, and let's not get into that. But the reality is, after menopause, women significantly age. And you gave me that stat about sexual function and reproduction. That's directly linked to what we're talking about, menopause. And directly linked. Not to about it.
One of the things that, and I'll say this is kind of crazy because menopause, and this is opinion only, that I'm not speaking science at this point, this is opinion only, and that is, as a man, I'm 50 years old, and testosterone is just the conversation amongst my friends. Like, at what age do you get on testosterone? And I'm a big fan, partially just because I'm also a fan of keeping muscle mass, which longevity, muscle mass, so on and so forth, all connected. But women don't. And there's been such this, menopause, you just kind of accept it. This is what happens. And then the goal is to get through it as quickly as possible with as little symptoms as possible. But I don't hear a lot of conversation. Maybe it is because I'm a man, but I don't hear a lot of conversation for women about how to prolong their menstrual cycle and how to increase, unless, because I do have a lot of friends who are in their 30s and 40s who still want to have children and never did, except 30, what is the age? 35 is the cutoff where we start calling it geriatric pregnancy?
Yes, 35, 34, 35, which is, frankly, pardon my French,
35 years old, and we're calling a woman. I had a friend of mine, she got pregnant at 35, 36 years old, and just went into a panic about this geriatric pregnancy. And what am I going to do? Because it wasn't a planned pregnancy. And it was like she had children before. She hadn't.
Right. That's what I'm saying. With the mother of my daughter, my wife, she had never had children. She never even got pregnant before.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, just like that. And that was it's one thing if you had children at a young age and have them again, especially with the same partner. But to never have had children and have it over the age of 34, 35, it's very interesting. Now, this is what I'm trying to say. These are things that we assume the nature is the most important, is natural. But nature is the best compromise. If you're the last man standing after a cataclysmic event, you're the winner. Doesn't matter whether you're the strongest or the fastest or you just won because you survived. And that survival is survival of the fittest. That all these phrases we hear about. So that's what it is. The interesting thing with menopause is that we assume this is natural. Now, what's interesting is the later a woman goes through menopause, the longer they generally tend to live. There's a very interesting statistic with this, and I can give you...
Let me just make sure I understood that correctly. The later a woman goes into menopause, the longer she lives.
Generally. But what definitely is very correlating, if she has children later in life, she will live longer. Now,
I've got theories on that are not biological, but
yeah, there might be a reason because socioeconomic, there's a number of other reasons for that, which I agree with. So you've got to be very careful with stats. And by the way, menopause is an interesting term. Everyone thinks it's stopping with men, menopause. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with menses, or the Latin word for month, pausing the monthly cycle. That's what menopause means.
Yes, literally, yes, 12 months without menstruation.
Yes, exactly right. That means you're in menopause. Before that, you're perimenopause. Exactly. So that's what it means. It's not nothing to do with men. So the thing is, we looked at this and we thought, well, wait a minute. Because you're therefore losing your fertility ability, the body says, well, you're not really needed. You don't need bone density. You don't need skin elasticity. You don't need muscle mass. You don't need the hydration for the brain fog. So there's a whole thing. Your body starts to literally age at a more rapid rate.
I want to stop there for a quick second and I want you to really give the audience some very specific things about this, Pedro. You said something, I'm a big fan of signaling and this almost quantum experience that we create. It's this idea of psychoneural immunology even.
That's that in my book, PNI. So.
Yeah, and the PNI stats about how when a person believes something, physiologically your body reacts. This idea that your cells are eavesdropping on everything that's taking place in your body. And you said something there that makes me think about that, and that is this idea that once you hit a certain age and things physiologically may happen, we tend to put down the resistance towards aging. And then there's all this idea, like I've heard so many statistics about once a person hits 40 or hits 45 or whatever the number is that whoever wants to put a tag on, like everything just starts falling apart. And then the problem is you told me at 40, everything I turned 50 last year, like 6 months ago, and I ended up having a couple injuries. I got sick right after I turned 50. Like these things happen. And it was funny because like several people said to me, you know what, that's what happens. And I'm like, I call bullshit on that.
That is bullshit. That is bullshit.
Like, obviously, well, you turn 50, everything changes. And I'm like, I call bullshit on that. I'm like, because me turning 50, I'm like, okay, I accept that I work harder now. I accept that I'm going to, staying in physical condition is going to require perhaps a little bit more intricacies than it did at 25. I accept that.
That's very true. But what was your lifestyle like at 25 to what you are? Now you run a company. You have responsibilities. Do you have those responsibilities at 25?
Actually, yes, but different. But at the same time, I would say at 50 years old, I'm probably healthier than I've ever been in my life, only because now I do have a very clear workout regimen. Now I do actually understand, like at 25 years old, I didn't know a fraction of the things that I know about. At 25, longevity was not a priority because I was never going to die. At 50, I'm thinking about longevity a lot. I understand the science of longevity at this point that I didn't. The stressors, I understand that stressors can change, but I actually did own a business at 25 years old, aside from school and all the other things. It's a different type of stress in life. So I wasn't a goofy college kid.
Okay. So I'll give you much. I'm a bit older. I'm nearly 55, right? So I'm 5 years older, 4 years older. So, although I'm in a longevity, so I should round up to my sixth decade, the round it up,
When I turned 40, I kept telling everybody, I can't believe a third of my life is,
exactly.
Everybody was stopping napping.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm closer to Social Security than I am than I've ever been. So I also have another child she's in her 26. So I've almost got Groundhog Day. I've got another daughter. I'm redoing my life. And there's interesting pictures I have, weird random, of me playing the piano with both of my daughters. They're playing, and I'm wearing the same T-shirt in both photographs, 16 years apart, right? And there's another one where they're doing practicing on the pads. And it was purely by accident. And they're both sort of similar coloring and blonde and blue eyed, but they're not exactly the same, but they're similar people in that sense, and they're doing exactly the same actions, and I'm holding the pads, and purely by chance, I didn't plan it, but literally a generation apart, certainly in demographic terms, I'm holding the same pads, and you see me looking at these pictures, and I don't really look that different, really, and I have the same energy I had back then, but the difference I have is life experience, and the reason I say that is that yes, you have better recovery at 25. But also you have ignorance, and ignorance is bliss, right? So you don't know any better.
Well, I'll say this, Zach, and it is, I believe that we're used to, when I have a new car, I don't expect to have problems with it, right? Like there's a warranty that comes along with that, the ignorance. And the warranty on the car is because they just don't expect much to go wrong with something that's new. Over the course of 50 years, I've collected some injuries that are not natural phenomenon, right? They're injuries. I hurt something, I fell, I did whatever. Those types of things are going to happen over 50 years, and they do lead to degradation. Totally get it. But when it comes to something like, I didn't have an injury that lowered testosterone level. Women are not having injuries that are pushing them into menopause, right? Like this is just part of
That's actually not true.
Well, perhaps there's injuries that can, but I want to get into, as we age, what is it? I want you to give me some specifics here for the listeners. Like, what is it specifically that a woman should be looking for? Like, what are the things? Like, before something happens, there's always something.
Signals, right.
But signals that are taking place doing it. Like, what is it?
Right. Well, there's a few. One of the many ones is sleep, hydration. So sleeping well through the night. Hydration. The feeling of being dehydrated. Whether it's just all over, you're feeling dry, you can get brain fog, and it depends, because obviously women act differently depending. Not all men act the same way, and there'll be certain tells. These are set signs. Hydration, issues with focusing eyesight, muscle mass, but you'll feel it. So it's not like,
and these are all premenopausal.
Well, they're perimenopause. So you'll get these sort of things that happen, and the little signs. The problem you've got to be really careful about is freaking out about it and overanalyzing. Oh my God, what am I going to do? This is going to, you've got to be really careful. So what we recommend is you literally take a full test. We do a full analysis, for instance, and we do your gut biome, we do your DNA, we do your gut brain scan, we do a density, and we do what we call the Freudenspannner test, which is our second law of longevity, and we blend them together, and we give you a baseline, and gives you that baseline. Ideally, you should do that if you can do it in your 20s, great. Doing it in 30s, it doesn't matter, because you'd stop growing at 35, stop growing at 25, your stasis till 35, and after 35, you begin to die cellular-wise, although it's variable. So basically, you should do a test to have a baseline, to know where you stand. So it's a bit like when someone says to you, your 3 words, at your age, I'll do a test, say, for instance. Or a woman does a test. Oh, how well can I do this? Oh, for your age, you're really good. That's bullshit. Because it's not for your age. It's relative to what you were at a different age. It's for yourself internally. You've got to know your own personal baseline. So you might be able to jump higher than I can. I might be able to run faster than you can. So if we compare each other jumping and running, well, you're a better jumper than me. So you're better for your age. That's not what it's about. It's about how, that's the important thing. And so therefore, the earlier you can baseline who you are, the better it is. But so ideally, you want to look for these signs. But those are the signs. Sleep, hydration, brain fog, tiredness. So not just sleeping through the night, but lacking of energy, lacking focus, deciding, you know what? And also the other one's being grumpy. Libido's another one, of course. But they're all connected. And the problem with this is you've got to have the baseline to work out the connectivity. You can do measurements, but you're doing a measurement in isolation doesn't make sense. Just measuring your mitochondrial, well, so what? What does that mean, right? So you've got to look at those things. The other thing is also your lifestyle. you've got to then decide, well, what is my lifestyle like? What am I doing in this? When you're 45, you might have a high stress job. We had one of our people has come to us and has a very high stress job and has gone into early menopause. Now she's come back into menstrual cycle again without any of our stem cell procedures, just by changing her mindset, her diet.
What are the things that I'm curious about? So for men, let's just talk men real quick. And I know we're talking about women's health here, but we're two men having this conversation.
Well, it's not so. I like women.
Sure, same. But the point is that I do understand that to a lot of women, listening to men talk about sexual health of women is obviously, there's kind of good luck having that conversation.
Yes.
Joe Polish, and he's a friend, and his partner, she's a vaginal surgeon. That kind of makes me laugh because Cherie has a book, and they laugh about the book because the book, on the cover, it says, a complete list of everything a man knows about the vagina. And, you open the book, but that's literally an entire page. Is it a book of blank pages? Yeah, that's kind of, yeah. So kind of funny. So that's not lost, Joe, if you're watching.
Yeah, that's funny. That's a good one.
Right. So that's not lost on me, but I want to give the example. So for men, when it relates to testosterone, so something that we can relate to, and that is testosterone levels may increase, but free testosterone is a very different conversation that a lot of people don't pay attention to. And as we age, pardon the phrase, there is the SHBG, and that is the sexual hormone binding globulin that ends up eating free testosterone. So our testosterone gets created, but then SHBG goes and eats that testosterone. So while your production levels are high, your SHBG is so high that a lot of men end up with very little testosterone for that reason, right? So that's something that can very specifically be measured, though. We can measure how much SHBG you actually have in your body. Right. And based on that, you're able to measure how much free testosterone a man has, and then do one of two things. Either you try to find a way to get rid of the SHBG in the system, or you just overproduce testosterone, but what? Ideally, right? And sometimes it's a matter of just push your testosterone production up to a 1400 and you're never going to know the difference. In women, what is the correlation to that exact same thing? Because for men, there's this women that I know, as 50 years old and not having any children myself, I'll get female friends that are like, yeah, but you can have kids as long as you want. True.
Yes.
I understand that. But for women, what is the comparison? Explain that.
Right. So first thing about Joe Polish and his vaginal surgeon liked, it's a brilliant open book. I thought I understood about women until I started this thing, and I realized I know nothing about women. Okay. And that's what I realized, full disclosure. That being said, the vagina isn't everything about a woman, right? There's a lot of other systems that we have that are similar, right? So in other words, in that area, the big area with women is about ovarian reproductive organs, not the vagina itself, but the ovaries, the uterus, with men, it's the testes, the prostate. We have areas that produce these hormones and or other parts that are connected to the rest of the what we call the endocrine system. So with women, it's about follicles within your ovaries that produce levels of estrogen as well as testosterone and progesterone, right? And also the adrenal glands, which we both have. So it's about a 60-40 split with reproductive organs, uterus, ovaries, and 40% adrenal glands. So what happens is when you go through menopause, that 60% is taken off the table, right? Straight away. So what you want to look for is you look for the FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone. As it goes up, it means your follicles are going down. So therefore, there's a sign that estrogen is not being produced as well. Now, of course, everyone says, what about this type of estrogen? It causes cancer. Well, there's different types of estrogen. There's estrone, estradiol, E1, E2, E3. Let's keep it really simple. E2 is the good one, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And then they have different views and different uses. So what we do is we see, and it's the only time women are less complicated than men. It's the one time, right? With a far more here, they got way more moving parts than men.
Every woman listening to this is going to be like, yeah, okay, whatever, buddy.
Yeah, okay. For one time.
Explain that, yeah.
So it means because everything that we do as men is concentrated, a lot of it's concentrated in the testes and this is not my expert area. This is more Panos Zavos' expert area. He's another person we work with. But what I've seen is that everything is much more fluid because we produce sperm in a much more fluid way. With women, it's broken out into the ovaries, and although they say you're given a set number of eggs, that's sort of not 100% true, but just keep it simple. It is. So it's more spread out. So it's easier for us to find those places, so we can promote the ovaries. We can get the follicles back, which will then knock into the improvement of estrogen. So what we've had a situation where we've had women go through a procedure, and they have had a 38% increase in estrogen endogenously from their own eggs, from their own body. 38% increase. In some cases, in very specific cases, as much as 60%. That's huge.
So an increase in estrogen production, explain this to me. So an increase in estrogen production, I get. Menstruation, of course, is an egg, is obviously...
It's actually the lining of the uterus coming out, yeah. Yeah.
But if you've got the limited number of eggs...
You've got more than you'll ever use in your life.
But break that down for me, because you're saying that a woman doesn't run out of eggs, she just stops menstruating. So you're saying that women will die with eggs still in their system.
Yes.
Interesting, because that's contrary to what I've ever been taught, that there's a limited number of eggs and it's like you run out.
Well, you don't run out. You just stop. They're sitting in the ovaries and they sit there. There was a study done where you can use Wharton's jelly and you can actually get a mesenchyme or some form of stem cell. Let's not get into the technicalities. And you could differentiate or become an egg. So we could technically regrow eggs, or we can make skin cells into eggs. We can do that, right? So the body has, what I'm saying is the body has inside of it these signaling systems, right, to actually keep you living a lot longer. And I think, again, we've got to be careful not just to focus on hormones and focus just on testosterone or estrogen and other, because that is one aspect. But using your car analogy, that's just, I don't know, that's just the engine. It's not the brakes. It's not the suspension. It's not the, it's not the chassis. It's just one bit of the pistons, just say, right? So there's a lot more to it than that. But fundamentally, it's a really good signal. Right? It's a really good signal, and it helps you work out where those issues can be.
So based on hormone panels, right? Okay, so you're getting labs done. A woman wants to know where she is in this process, just as a man does. And I get my labs done every 6 months. And every 6 months, I just do full panels, including everything from mineral, heavy metal levels to hormone panels to just see where things are. So from an endocrine dysfunction standpoint, I know where I stand at all times, and then I know what behavioral things to change about that. Is there anything other than that you recommend? Well, is hormone panels enough? No, that's the question.
No, it's not. But the thing is also, there's a fine line. Do you want to be really excessive and just have all these concepts like a lab rat? You've got to have a trade-off, right? But what we do is when we do the full test, we do bone density, we do brain scans, CAT scans, not MRIs, CAT scans, the quick ones, right? And we know how to read those to show you why your neurons are because when you go through menopause, your neurons function in a different way. By the way, we have andropause. We think we're invincible, but we fell off a cliff when we were 18 with that. We just think we're invincible. Yeah, man, I could do that.
You're going to live forever.
Yeah. We do gut biome. That's huge, massive.
Yes.
And people don't realize that some of your hormones or some of the things like serotonin, 60% of your serotonin is produced by bacteria. It's not even your body. It's a host in your body.
Correct.
Right? So wait a minute. Oh, well, if you get SIBO, SIBO is excessive bacterial, C for excessive fungal stuff. That comes up into your wrong part of your alimentary canal. You've got 32 feet or something around the alimentary canal from your throat to your anus. I mean, it's a crazy amount. And in each part of it, there's different bacteria that live there. And they go to the wrong area, you get out of your lane, and then everything goes wrong. Well, that's bacterial, and you've got to be measuring that regularly, really regular, more than people realize.
Well, and I'm going to comment on that and say this, because this absolutely infuriates me about the medical community. I'm thrilled that penicillin exists. I'm very happy that we have antibiotics. I'm furious at how much we pass them around.
Yes.
Like like every single person in town, my aunt, I love her dearly, but it doesn't matter what's wrong. Her recommendation to you need to go get an antibiotic for that.
No.
And I'm not making that as an indictment on her. I'm saying that's clearly she's a product of what she believes and what she's been taught over the course of her life.
Yes.
Like she gets a sinus infection and immediately wants an antibiotic. I'm like, but that's probably not a bacteria infection. Like a sinus infection is typically viral, but an antibiotic's doing nothing for you.
Oh, but it's secondary infection. That's what we're going to avoid, because that's how they go around it.
But the problem is all you're doing is just setting off nuclear bombs in your gut all the time. And now you're 6 months trying to rebuild a microbiome if you're doing it intentionally.
Right. So this is a very valid point. So this is the thing, is like, so we look at gut biome, and then the other thing we obviously do is the basic hormone balance. The other thing we do is emotional health. So we call it the Freudensteiner test. So you do like, it's qualitative. How you feel, how do things work out, what with them, so on and so forth. So, my wife passed away. And so in that point, my hair fell out. And I actually just started to fall out. I actually grew it long. I actually cut it about 2 days ago. Literally, I had it goes down the middle of my throat, and I just cut it like that. And I just did it after 2 years. I decided that was it, or 2.5 years. So why did I have a physical reaction to an emotional response to a traumatic event? It was, how are we going to explain to there was a sudden unexpected, it was so on and so forth. It was also, the fact is that, we had a child. I don't explain to our daughter, logically thinking, it was like, how do you deal with that? So I had a physical reaction to an emotional response. That's the thing that as humans, we ignore at our peril.
Yes.
We are not machines. We're not Terminators. We're humans. And that's how it is. And you have to accept that, or go and download yourself onto the grid or something. You know what I mean? Because this is what you are. And so these are measurements that you have to look at, and those are the markers. And it doesn't have to be super crazy, but just doing your blood panels, your hormone panels in isolation is not good enough, in my opinion. Now, bone density doesn't have to be done every 6 months. You can do it every year. And if you have naturally good bones, it's okay, right? So you've done your bones, you got good bone density, fine,
I want to go back to the psychological side of things that you're talking about. And again, a lot of this gets back to that PNI, that psychoneuroimmunology code of the Freudian.
That's what we call it, yeah.
Interestingly enough, and I love this. Every conversation I have, you don't know me, but every conversation I had always has to get into all sides of things. Like we are a physical, we are a psychological, and we are a spiritual being. And all three of those things lie at an intersection. And the
that law, body acts in isolation.
That Venn diagram where we live in the center of all of those things, and yet we create sciences that touch one or the other dialogue, and wherever you design shall meet, right?
Yes.
And we create doctors who only understand the physiological, and we create psychologists who only deal with the emotional, and we have theologians who deal with the spiritual, and yet quite often, and again, you don't know this about me, but yes, I have a master's degree in theology. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. I have a PhD in functional medicine. And I laughingly say, who cares? Because the reality is like all of it exists and harmonizes. And when it's in disharmony is when we end up with so much dysfunction. And the dysfunction can manifest physiologically. And the dysfunction can manifest psychologically. And the dysfunction can manifest spiritually. Like all of this happens, usually all of it. And yet we treat it in isolation.
Yes.
And treating it in isolation doesn't resolve the conflict that's taking place holistically.
Yes.
When you talk about this stuff, and I love the fact that you're saying your clinic is dealing with menopause and you're dealing with aging females and ignoring some of this. And I think any woman listening to this conversation, there needs to be, when a woman's going through menopause and having menopausal symptoms, being discarded as having just a physiological experience will probably get you murdered. And the reality is like, it's a very emotional thing. It's you've mentioned earlier, I said I was going to put a pin in something. I'm going to go back to that point. The point was that when women have children later in life, they tend to live longer. And what's interesting is because well, sure, that doesn't surprise me. And I would love for you to unpack that physiologically, but emotionally and psychologically, it tells me that this woman realizes that she has a reason to be around in the world.
Very good.
Because there is a child that's relying as per through the child's developmental period, and that woman can't slow down. A 40-year-old woman who has a child is an active parent through 60.
Yep.
You know, my grandmother, I say I'm the third grandchild to my grandmother's third child, and she was 40 when I was born.
Right.
Because my family reproduces in their teenage years.
Right.
And what's so funny to me, though, is I'm like, well, my grandmother at 40 was old.
So it's interesting you said. So my grandmother had her first child when she was 44. So my grandmother was born in the 1800s. We're now in 2026, right? And she had one child, and grew up to a very healthy child. Everything was fine. So it was interesting, and she lived a very long time. But all of my unfortunately, one of my grandfathers died of a freak case of pneumonia, weirdly enough, at 49, which is interesting. I'll put a pin in that one. I'll come back from that one. But the thing is that fundamentally, when you look at this, the purpose is very key. So if you look at the blue zones, thing, which we can discuss whether we believe in it or not, but having family who are from the blue zone, being a Greek, I could sort of talk with a bit of authority on some of it. But fundamentally, they all have same things. They have regular moderate exercise, a plant-based style of diet, or it varies, and this is very important, that varies, is there's not one size fits all.
Right.
It's a few sizes fits nearly everyone.
But what's the one thing they all have in common?
Purpose, or they believe social structure, and they believe in something greater than themselves. Community, yeah, that's it. And they all have community, and that's the quite point. There's community. They all have community, and there is this critical size. So when we talk about menopause, and the reason we chose that was purely from a sort of practical standpoint. It was like, what's the one, if I was to choose one shot that could make the biggest difference, it's that one. And that's why we don't work with men as much, because it's not so clear cut with us. That's why I'm saying it's the one time we're more complicated. That's what I mean by that. So fundamentally, when you look at that, you go, okay, you have this area where it's this community, but everyone's slightly different. And so everyone has different reactions to different types of ways. So you have a different blood type, you have a different dietary requirement. So amongst, say, the Greek long livers, they have loads of sugar, loads more meat, right? The Costa Ricans, I believe, smoke cigarettes. So there's all these different dynamics. So they're not saying they're all chain smoking, alcohol. There's cultural delta that changes. They vary. So we all have these things that work for us or don't work for us. So when we look at our people that have come to us in our procedure, we all thought, with our ignorance at the time, 5 years, 6 years ago, that it was all physiological. Now what we've discovered is there's a lot of people come to us who have emotional trauma that manifests itself physiologically. And you can't just change that by doing a steroid shot or whatever. It doesn't work, or taking a supplement. You've got to unwind what's in here and what's in here. And that takes time. That's not a stem cell procedure. That is understanding your dynamic, your framework. And then from a position of strength and knowledge, you can then change the things that need to be changed for you. And not everyone's the same. You and I are similar age groups. You and I are similarly fit, right? But we'll have different weaknesses in our chain. Right?
Well, you mentioned a great point there, and that is the emotional matching the physiological. I'll touch on vagus nerve stimulation, right? Like,
this is all in, or you just going to read my book, actually.
I think, this idea of the vagus nerve, which some people may or may not understand, is like the master channel, if you will, that runs through all the way from the top to the bottom, and is the primary system for the gut's communication between the gut and the brain. Even we talked about that earlier, but this idea of
biomaxes,
our bodies stay in sympathetic nervous system response, and when in that sympathetic, that fight or flight, that do or die high stress type environment, it's not just a psychological reaction. Like, people who live in the state of anxiety, I have a cousin who is just in constant sympathetic nervous system. Like,
male, female? How old?
45. She's been there a long time, but yes.
Ooh.
But she is already going through perimenopause and so on and so forth. But I mean, she can hear a car door close outside and practically jumps off the couch.
This is absolutely something we've dealt with already. Now, when you think of, and I'm not saying we know the answer for your cousins, I'm saying this kind of thing where they're in fight or flight, and everyone says, it's because I'm stressed. Well, actually, wait a minute.
Or is it you're stressed because
of what you're doing in your life, and so let me give you an example. We all drink, I don't drink sodas actually, but we give just give them an apple juice, right? Now I call sugar KC, kiddie cocaine, is what I call it, right? You literally
appropriate
run around and you see and then they crash. Right? So the problem with sugar is so unlike alcohol, alcohol produces sugar, but unlike alcohol or drugs, it's actually what our body runs on, glucose. It's we're ATP, ADP, blah, 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 blah. So we're designed to run on this. It's natural, but we're not designed to have refined sugar all the time.
Well, we're not designed to have refined sugar at all.
So, yeah, okay. But you know what I mean. I understand. You know what you said, yeah. So, it's a treat. Now, in the wild, refined sugar was a fruit.
Yeah.
Right? But a fruit now is healthy, regular food. We just have scoops of sugar in, sodas or whatever. In bread, you buy bread. And again, we can get into the whole, sedentary lifestyle and, having bread, but let's forget about that. Yeah. But fundamentally, we have all these things that we have in life that are hidden pitfalls of despair, for want of a better term, hidden pits of despair. And it drives your body into this massive up, high and low. And then it starts to affect your brain chemistry. So, for instance, when I went, we went to Europe last year, obviously to Greece to see the family, and obviously we'd had so much things going on, and we spent a lot of time, and we hadn't been to Greece for a long time. And the first thing that happened when I went to Crete, in the wilds, yogurt, everything like really natural, and everything. Look, I went into a depression, literally.
Detoxic.
Massive despondency. Almost suicidal, like, and I knew what it was, but I couldn't believe how strong it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize I hadn't been home for 9 years. And so it was a long time. And I was detox.
Detox, yeah.
Exactly. And my daughter was loving this detox.
Detoxing, you're American.
Yeah. And I got the bit I'm healthy, Now, of course, you can get a healthy lifestyle in America, but not if we travel. And not if you go out and eat it. And you have to work at it. You go down those basic those gas stations, and you have anything on those gas stations, you are blowing it apart.
Also, I did that this morning. Like I stopped at a gas station on my way to the studio this morning, and grabbed a protein bar. I know better than that.
I know,
but it was what I had time for.
Now, this is the thing. This is what we do. So we say to you, you know better. Mm-hmm. But you need someone to be on your shoulder. You're talking about history a bit. When a Roman general had a triumph, right? That's in your map of Rome over there. And they would have a slave behind him on the canvas saying, you are mortal, as they were being applauded, like, wait, Julius Caesar. And they're telling you, this is on your back of your shoulders to keep you in place. And I think we need training. We need to have a coach to always guide us, because we do have a sense of basically deluding ourselves. And that's fundamentally. So when you look at that, those areas of the PNI and the gut biomaxis, the vagus nerve, they're all connected, but you still have to put the right inputs, or the right, what was the word you used, Danish? Giving yourself a structure, or we call it
discipline.
Yeah, it's scheduling, giving yourself time to be disciplined.
Let me ask you, Zach, I love the conversation, the idea. I want to just close the loop on that nervous system conversation. And that is, we have a tendency to, people live in this sympathetic nervous system and don't realize about that the emotional side that creates. And then it's kind of like a chicken or the egg, though, because did the nervous system create the emotional dysfunction, or did the emotional dysfunction cause the nervous system reaction? Arguably both earned. But I don't think it's binary. I think it's both. Doesn't mean we don't need to interrupt it.
Yeah.
Because we need to interrupt that flow. But I don't think enough people realize how, it's kind of the, I'll laughingly say, although it's not a laughing matter, the men who will struggle with erectile dysfunction or whatever, you're like, it was a hard day at work, right? Ha ha ha. And it's like, Well, no, but literally that's a thing.
They keep a stiff upper lip.
Right. But it's a thing, though. It's this idea that when we get stuck in this nervous system, it's a survival mechanism for the body that says anything that is non-essential to absolute survival, turn off.
Yeah.
Which includes sexual function, which includes digestive function, which includes emotional function. It actually, every part of the brain that doesn't require attention starts getting shut down, which leads to brain fog. Like, why are you in a heightened state but experiencing brain fog? Well, because the central processing isn't required. The only thing that's required for survival is very acute attention, which is why when the car door slams, I hear it, I respond, but I didn't notice that, I just misplaced $1,200 out of the checking account, right? Like that kind of stuff passes by and doesn't pay attention because we are in this heightened state and it's your body's survival mode, but we're not programmed to live there.
Exactly right. That's great. I mean, I'm really glad that Sandy introduced us, so shout out to Sandy Martin on this one.
Shout out to Sandy Martin.
So guys, got a good camera, very good camera. Sandy Martin, biohacker expert. There you go. Problem is we have societies is because we have this, and without getting into sort of morality issues, we all about making money and experience. So we promote division, we promote the fight or flight because by default we are designed to react to existential threats more readily than threats that are the positive things. Because obviously positivity is less about survival and more about growth. And existential threats is about survival. So we're programmed to be in that fight or flight. So society has gone into this weird dynamic of, we create division. We have sound bites. We scroll through. I mean, you're going to ask me for my social media and I don't really, my social media is rubbish. I don't really follow it really. I have it, but I don't really do anything. I don't care because it's sound bites. It's not about not all of it, but
it's all dopamine.
It's all dopamine hits, right? So the fact is I'm going to come in person to see you is because you get a lot more from all the sort of those quiet signals that are not obvious. So the fact is we're programming our people, our children, adults to be in this constant fight or flight. That has an effect on the body and you have to unwind these things. You talk about emotions. We talk about where you have negative emotions, so you have to get yourself to zero. So everyone just says, psychology is all about getting in. Professor Galarios talks about this, part of our team, which is where you have this sense that you hit zero and you're fine. But actually, you've got to go to positive manifestation to offset the two to get yourself back in the middle again. And that's really important. And this is what we call the second law, the effects emotions have on aging, because the stress that you put on your body excessively will age you. Because it will burn out your systems. And for what reason? What, by scrolling Facebook or Instagram, Instashite, Facebook, what do I call it, or TikTok or whatever you want to call it, all of those things, they're all the same.
Well, and unfortunately, I would say that, probably somewhat existentially, I'll say we're teaching a younger generation. It's that dopamine mission, to a world that these hits have value and they don't have value. There's no value to it. And then a real dopamine hit no longer feels like something that's good enough, right? This idea, like, I'll give an example, like the best way to experience dopamine, gratitude. Literally stop and just think of things in your life that you're grateful for. You will get the same dopamine hit. And yet we've actually, I would say we live in the most ungrateful generation that I can imagine. And part of it is because we're getting those dopamine hits someplace else and we're not requiring having to work for them anymore.
Yes, so that's very true. But the other point is with gratitude. This is a prime example. When you say, I'm grateful, and let's do 5 namastes or 10 Hail Marys or whatever it is, you're not really realizing why you're doing it. What are you grateful for? So if someone says to me, Zack, you're 54, how are you doing as a single dad? And how are you doing this? And I'm like, well, I have my health, I have my family, I have friends, I have purpose. The fuck else is there in life, really? Yeah. Really? I'm going to go to the beach and do this or do that. Yes, I could have more money. Yes, I occasionally have to worry about things. Yes, there's, what am I going to do here? But that's life. You've got to get used to sailing in choppy waters. The sea is not always calm. right? And so that makes you healthy, right? But the question is, if you get it too easily and you have to work at it and don't work at it, your body had defaulted into this lazy pattern. And that's the key.
I'm a big fan of do hard things.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to be a bit smart. Don't do crazy things where you're busting yourself up, but you've got to take the harder route. Don't take the elevator, walk up the stairs.
Well, but it's psychological resilience.
Yeah.
And resilience, I would arguably say, is in multiple different levels the key to longevity.
Yes.
That is, it's not about an extreme high or an extreme low. It's the ability to navigate between the two. And it's HRV, truthfully, right? It's not about how high can you go. It's not about how low are you. It's how quickly you move between those. We have a vagal tone. It's all of these different things are all rooted on this exact same premise of being able to regulate.
We have a phrase: winners adapt and losers make excuses. So it's like you adapt. You've got to adapt, and you might not want to adapt, and you might not like having to adapt, but you have to adapt if you want to survive, and that will allow you, and then it gives you perspective. So if you've had everything and then you have nothing, it gives you perspective to realize what it feels like. And I think that is something that we don't get necessarily instruct our next generation. You want to achieve everything, but okay, well, why?
And work for what?
For what?
Dan Sullivan always uses the phrase, he's adapted it, but he always says there's only two teams. There's the winners and the learners.
Right.
And the winners and the learners, and he's like, well, there could be a third team. Those are the losers.
Yeah.
Because the losers were neither the winners nor the learners.
Right.
He said, but I've only ever been on one of two teams.
Right.
The winner or the learner.
This is the pin. I'm going to come back on this pin now, which is interesting. So after every great victory is the most dangerous time, right? Because at that moment of victory, the thing that you bounced against has gone away. And that's when you get hubris or whatever it is, right? And we can go on to historical reproductions. I was 49 years old. I had gone through a very big moment of, some things that happened in my life. And I'd had a very big victory, for want of a better term. And in that moment of that victory, I thought, okay, now I'm going to get back to where I was and getting myself, I was still fit and everything, but I'm going to live this. I'd all planned how I was going to live my life. And at that moment, I hit my toe and I sort of, it swelled up and I couldn't exercise, but I was just on that cusp of what I call sort of staying fit, but I wasn't. And my body just overloaded. And then fast forward 4 months, I had COVID very badly. It was the third time I got COVID, actually. The first two, nothing happened. And I was going in to see the Sinai Monday morning after being awake for 10 days, coughing up blood. Going in, thinking, my grandfather, who I'm named after, Zack, died at freak case of pneumonia at 49. I'm 49 years old. It's my eldest daughter's birthday, August the 9th. Going into her birthday. And I'm like, am I dying today? I'm like, fuck that. I'm not dying, right? I'm not doing that. But fundamentally, you're programming yourself. Like, you've got to be careful at those moments of, why am I not, what have I got to live for? And I knew, and also I was a scientist, so I sort of knew the physiology issues. So I didn't panic. And it's interesting talking to fellow friends of mine who are doctors or scientists who have gone through similar things I went through. And I remember afterwards, I went through it all and my blood oxygenation was really low. We came back up to 97. I was in the recovery and the recovery, and I held this guy's hand. He was 35, right? Super fit, super healthy. And he literally died in my hand. Not quite. I'm in the gown too, because the family weren't allowed in. I don't know for sure if he died, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did. The old people came in and I was saying, fight, tell me about your children, tell me, but you can't tell what was going on inside that man's mind. So, and that's the thing. And so what I'm saying is that pin is like, and I was thinking to myself, was I going to go like my grandfather? No way. Now, I don't know why. I never met him, so I don't know what caused it. I know that whoever knew him, so he was incredible, but I never met it.
Yeah, I mean, so people die. Not to diminish that, but I'll give the example and I'll say my grandmother, my mom's mom, died at 52.
Yeah.
Sudden heart attack.
Yes.
Done. No signs.
You don't know why.
Don't know exactly what caused all of that. But the point of that is at 52 years old, my mother believed that her time was up any moment.
Yes.
Like at the age of 52, my mother she lived until she was 62.
Right.
But for those 10 years, her entire mindset was she was on borrowed time.
Now, my opinion, I don't know about your mother, but I bet you that might have affected her longevity. And you can take, and the thing is, you can take two ways for it, right? So with my other grandfather, who was the inspiration for one of the main inspirations for doing what I do today, he died of freak pulmonary embolism, a freak stroke, in his mid-70s, and he looked so young. His two brothers, one's still alive, and he's over 100. And the reality is that, you know, I saw why he died. He died of a broken heart, fundamentally. And I saw that. So I took that as a strength rather than, oh, it's my, you know, but we have the luxury of, you have PhDs and masters, and, you know, you have the luxury of knowledge that you can now apply. And it's our duty to pass that on to other people.
And that's my intention. My entire goal, even in hosting a podcast, is passing on it. How do we get that information to people? How do we get people who may not know this stuff to really understand it? There's more to it than what we believe, because I genuinely believe in some respects that, you know, I took the red pill somewhere along the lines and no longer live in the matrix. And I think the last couple of years with Bobby Kennedy and everything else, like, there's been so much weight, fruit pyramids upside down, and seed oils are killing people. And I mean, I think the whole world now is seeing a lot of the stuff that maybe some of us have been looking at for years, and suddenly going, wait, what? Like, what? So I'm grateful for that. I'm incredibly grateful for what he's doing for other people in our community and what they're doing. But it's one of those things that I think too often people rely on a person or two people with a small group of, no, we all should be talking.
Yes, yeah, we should. So I think it's a very valid point you brought up there. So, you know, I could say, well, you know, I'm really smart. I did all of this. No, bullshit. I had the luxury of being given a Greek diet as a basic foundation for my comfort food. So when my comfort food is not a meat pie, it's black-eyed peas and collard greens, or ramatika and lakana, as we'd say, but it's equivalent of with olive oil and lemon. Oh, wow, a lemon, an antidepressant, olive oil, really good oil for you. You know, so my default, or beetroot, or whatever it is, very good for me. I didn't choose that. I was trained as a young kid. So that was... So I'm grateful. Gratitude. I'm grateful for that. I was also taught about, I was given love. I was given, you know, I was valued as a human being. So I try and pay it forward. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, of course, but I'm grateful for that. And I sort of realize that, you know, this is not an arrogance. It's also a very hot. I hate the H word, but I don't know, humbling, but it is very leveling to realize that these things are very important for you. And so we have that, and so it makes you grateful. So I pass that on. Now, there's other things I've learned from other people that I didn't know, and I learned from them. And so I think we need to talk about it. But the fundamentals, really, the most important thing is the basics. And the basics are generally quite cheap or free. That's the reality. Yes, right? They're boring, but they're essential.
Absolutely. And I tell people who talk about how, you know, biohacking and longevity, it's so expensive. And I was like, oh, really? Like mobility, fasting, sleep.
Yeah.
All free.
Diet, exercise, and emotional health. That's what we call it.
All of it works.
It will not buy my book and get the... but serious.
Zach, I want to go back where we started, because our conversation we started was really about menopause and female reproductive health and hormonal health. What advice would you give? If you work in this all the time, you've got Austin Labs, and you're working with women who are going through menopause to potentially extend their fertility period, but also to recreate emotional health for them through that process, obviously. I wanted you to break this down for us in 3 different sound bites, if you will. So that is, the first one, what is it that women should be looking for other than a calendar? Because every woman just assumes she's going to go through menopause at the same time when mom did. But I don't know why they often did. There are correlations. There's correlations, but I would say that there's genetics and then there's epigenetics. Right? There's environment. There's environmental and lifestyle changes that absolutely determine that, even more than genetics.
Yes, so absolutely.
So what is it that a woman can be doing before she gets into menopause? Okay, look for that. The second thing I want you to is, when a woman's in perimenopause, what are the lifestyle changes that you strongly recommend? And when a woman actually gets to the point of menopause, what are the things that she ought to be doing? And the truth is those may all be the same things. So
yeah, let's do it. So what are the signs you should be doing before you're in menopause?
speak to a 25-year-old woman, a 35-year-old woman, and a 55-year-old.
Okay, right. So I've got a 26-year-old daughter, right? So the first thing I would say is make a virtue out of a necessity. Create a lifestyle that is fundamentally healthy, but doesn't feel like you're working at it, right? So, have a lifestyle where you do exercise, you move around, you've got to move, you've got to exercise. And it doesn't mean you've got to be an Olympic athlete. You've just got to get out there and constantly do your exercise routine, whatever that is. For some women, it's running. For some women, it's yoga. For some women, it's kickboxing. Whatever it is, you've got to find yourself what works for you.
Two things I want to put on there. One, especially for women, but for men as well, that's a community factor as well. That going to the gym and working out, make friends at your gym and you will go to your gym more often.
Yeah.
Second thing is working out is not a punishment for what you ate.
Part of life.
Right. It's not a punishment for what you ate. Working out is a celebration of what you can do.
Yeah, great line. I'm going to use that one. I'm going to use that. All yours. Thanks. I'll take it. But the other thing as well is diet as well. So it's diet, exercise, and emotional health. So basically it's the same thing. Nothing changes. But you've got to find food that works for you. Right? Now, this is the tricky thing, you see, because the signs that you have at a certain age, you might be going into some form of fight or flight shock, and it could be diet, could be exercise, could be I've got ADD or XYZ or ABC, or whatever you want to call it, all these different things you may have, which I think a lot of them are constructs rather than, I'm not saying they don't exist, but they're not as identified because that's how people make their money. We identify this. So you take this pill and you'll be fine. No. Own it yourself. Always question, number one. So the first thing is, what I would do at any age is get a baseline. Now, obviously, we believe our baseline is the best, of course, or one of the best. But in other words, know what your basics are. Take your gut biome. That changes very rapidly, by the way. Take your brain scans, which change rapidly. Do your hormones, they change as rapidly. And obviously you do things like bone density, which is more slow. So you have your basic setup. So you know what you can do. So with my daughter, I said, take all these things, have it done. And she's got it. She's got the baseline. She's very fit and healthy. But nothing will happen at 25, 26. Maybe when she's 35, she might review it again, but she's living a lifestyle of health. She's not, not going for excessive behavior. And that's really important. So diet and exercise and sort of giving her time chance to rest and sleep, right? Now, for some people, rest can mean many things. It can be 8 hours for some people, 5 hours for others, whatever. Now, that's the first. So the signs are, what happens with those signs? You'll get inflammation, hives, markers on your hands, or tiredness. But if you don't have a baseline to revert to, you have no idea what this could be. So the first thing I would do for anyone is get a baseline, get a full analysis documentation, get a full setup.
And by the way, the same is true for men.
Yes, and we just do it for men too.
There are men as well. Give you an example. Say I had a full body MRI done a couple of years ago now, and it showed a large prostate. But a large prostate doesn't mean enlarged prostate. That just means I may have a large prostate, but I had no baseline.
Exactly. So therefore, you're doing your result. You're trying to diagnose something without having a reference point. That's the problem. That was the problem. Everyone's trying to do it, and they're trying to do it. Sorry.
So but 100% true. And at the point that I had blood work done and showed elevated PSA levels, that immediately went into the fear factor for every doctor. Well, you had an enlarged prostate, you had elevated PSA levels.
Those are the results.
The results were I had elevated PSA levels from an infection.
Right.
And I just have a large prostate.
Right. But if you knew you had large prostate from before,
and I have known,
you would have been a rule like the emotional trauma that you now got. I bet your cortisol spiked, adrenaline spiked. I can imagine the whole thing. Oh my God.
And the thing is, the truth of the matter is my dad had prostate cancer. So my immediate response was, oh, dear God, now I'm dealing with prostate cancer. Did it panic me to the point of thinking it? No, because I'm friends with some of the best functional oncologists in the world. So I'm like, okay, well, I just need to get on that protocol. But here's the reality. Like, it's still, you're right, cortisol levels spike, emotions change, like everything starts to change in your head. But had I had a baseline, none of that reaction would have taken place. So again, the same thing for a woman, right? Like, yeah, you need to know what the baseline is to even know how that goes. I want you to comment. I want to
I have the rest of the question. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. So you're saying, so get a baseline. That's the first thing what I do for the signs. That would be for pre, peri, or menopausal, right? Then you have a baseline. But if on the assumption you haven't done that point, when you hit peri, you'll start to see things like issues with brain fog, lack of motivation. And the first thing you start to get that is immediately get a test done. Immediately. Contact people. And obviously,
what test is that?
Well, we do a full analysis. So we would say a bone density, a Freudian span test, which is obviously proprietary, but an emotional test, the brain scan, a gut biome test, and the panels as well as full VNA, right? Because the thing with that is once you have that, we can work with it. Even if you do it at 50, we can still work with it, whatever it is. But the sooner you get it done, but the signs are motivation, energy, libido discount, eyesight may be going. And again, you might have a genetic issue with eyesight, but it might not be that. It might be something else.
Right.
But the soon as something happens, get the full testing done. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is the second thing we would recommend immediately is store your DNA. And I don't mean, to store it with like a ZBG or something like that, where you take a token and you only have ownership of your DNA, because at some point that might come in useful in the future.
Explain that.
So the one thing you truly own is your own DNA. This is a different conversation, right? Anyway, but if you store it, your DNA will change over time. It can change. You get your epigenetics and change that thing. So if you have something stored with a natural sample of your DNA, I can
just say, man, freeze.
Yeah, I think this is a separate conversation. Maybe I should talk about you with this offline. You could decide to talk about it another time. But okay, it's
self-controversy.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and it's something that the group of us have been working with together, whereby you truly own something that no one else can take from, right? Yep. But that's something, because we offer that to our patients when they come in immediately, although it's not widely done yet.
But it does put a stitch in time.
Puts a stitch in time, and you take that. And that's the first thing you should do. And the signs are brain fog, lack of motivation, despondency, starting to dislike the people that you love. That's a big one. Why am I disliking these people? Why do I hate everything? Why is this coffee doesn't taste good? Why doesn't this feel right? That's a really good sign. Your emotions, your feelings, when those things happen. And the thing is, you've got to be careful, because it's our tendency, especially in the Western world, particularly in America, is to, oh my God, the minute you have one drink, you're an alcoholic. It's black or white. It's shades of gray.
I want you to speak on one quick topic: birth control pills. Throwing that one out of nowhere.
Ooh.
Because clearly I understand the purpose behind birth control pills, but I also know several women who aren't even sexually active who are on birth control pills.
Did you stop there and flip the...
Correct. To just offset a painful menstrual cycle. How do birth control pills and that type of, I'll say, pharmaceutical interaction with the menstrual cycle affect menopause onset?
My viewpoint is less is more. So having had, been married, more than once, having experienced, having relationships, understanding these, going through a range of things, what I've noticed is that I would avoid things that disrupt your bodily system as much as possible as a default. I'm not saying don't ever do it, but I'm saying be very careful about what you do, because once you start down that road, there's can be a lot of time to come back to that level we talked about of negative to positive, back to the middle. So this is where that blank book, as you talk about, because I'm a man, right? So it's different.
This is about as non-committal as you've been on an answer the entire conversation.
Yeah, and I could be non-committal on that one, because I think that you've got to be very careful with those situations, because it's not in isolation. When someone comes to us, obviously they're on a different viewpoint, but as a rule, I would avoid as much pharma as you can. As a rule.
I glass of red.
I'm not saying they're bad. Like, we need antibiotics sometimes. We need to, but as a rule, less is more.
Well, and I think that really becomes a matter of, here's my opinion, and again, I say this as a man, is I believe that we over-index on the use of pharmaceuticals, and the conversation that I have so often is we deal with downstream symptoms rather than upstream prevention. And that's what we're about, prevention. That painful menstrual cycles is usually an indication of something else is going on that you're not dealing with. I would arguably say I know several women in the medical profession who believe that menopausal symptoms at all are nonsense. That women are dealing with menopausal symptoms, and everything from hot flashes to mood swings and everything else are nothing more than gut dysregulation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that.
And if they actually dealt with gut issues prior, that menopause itself is not supposed to be symptomatic. It's happening as you're ending up with all of these systems because something's changing their body, we agree.
Yes.
But it's triggering all of this because these two things used to live in harmony, and when one of them changed, the other one is changing in response. Again, as a man, I clearly don't have an authority on that topic, but as a scientist, yes, I do, and I do understand that, and I can lean on several female doctors who are close confidants that would arguably say that same thing.
Yeah, I think realistically, you're right. Fundamentally, we have to look at these things, and the holistic word, another H word I'm not a big fan of, humble, holistic. Yeah. But we have to look at systemically the whole process.
Absolutely.
So that's where our three laws come in. Like I said, fully functioning reproductive organs, foundation for extending life. The second is emotions affect aging, and the third is the body does not act in isolation. There's a series of systems that overlap. Why does the nervous system overlap the blood system, overlap it's like a bunch of layers.
Yeah, right.
So when you look at it, you have to take all of those in their entirety. And I think the problem with drugs, I always jokingly say, if you're only taking them for fun, don't take them for, sorry, whoops, yeah, sure, but what I'm saying is just like fundamentally, you're taking a drug without knowing why you're taking it. I'm not saying you don't need them, but you've got to know those basics. And like your doctor friends are saying is maybe gut dysregulation. That's why if you've had your baseline, right, you can, wait a minute. Or maybe I am that person who has a really high adrenaline level. Maybe I've got a really high heart rate. And that's normal for me, right?
I think we lean on our parents' experience as being normal, and then we regulate accordingly. But
your parents lived a different lifestyle.
100%.
100%.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe that's not even
the problem.
Fair.
And especially with the level of change that's happened over the last 50, 100 years. It's huge.
Absolutely.
When your parents were going as children, they didn't have overloaded sodas, they maybe had some things, but not to the...
Yeah, but the level of processed foods and Wi-Fi signals.
They didn't have Wi-Fi. I mean, God only knows what happens to Wi-Fi. Who knows?
We don't even know what most of it.
Blue light stuff. I mean, the whole thing with all the glasses people wear, and actually I thought it was a bit of a joke, but actually it's not a joke. It's real.
I actually just saw an ad the other day that was for something that you put on your screen that actually blocks blue light. So it actually gives like a red hue to your phone to block blue light if you're using devices made it mad.
And also, for many years, I had a whole period where I was off grid for 10 years, 12 years, literally living.
Felt good.
Yeah. And I now realize that the things I'm having now are things that people had in their mid-30s. The whole tiredness and so on and so forth. So, but again, it's like, so in answer to your question, less is more.
I agree with that.
Less is more.
Zach, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the work you're doing to support women who are going through what I believe socially we've considered to be a woman's crisis moment.
Yeah.
But because I don't think it has to be. And I think for many women, they dread the onset of menopause rather than celebrating it as being the next passage in life, right?
Well, what can I once say, which is that, half the world is run by women. That's that, right? So we either let nature catch up with society, or we go back to being cavemen. It's one of the two, right? And I think we're going to take the nature catches up with society, and this is what we're trying to do.
Well, I would actually arguably say that we've gotten so sophisticated that we've gone back.
Yeah, but
Nick, we've gotten so sophisticated that all of the discoveries that we're seeing in science right now are
going back to ancient wisdom.
Yes.
That we have to, we've understood the science behind it, but the wisdom has helped.
We called it magic back then.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is, Mediterranean diets, and it's like, well, now we understand why it works, but it just worked. And, circadian rhythms. And so like they've always existed and our ancestors believed in them, even though they didn't know why, or biblical knowledge that, that we understand. And like nowadays we're looking at like, why were they told not to eat pork? Like, well, now we understand.
Ruminous break down. Ruminous break down the protein so you don't have the issue of the food, which is what cows and sheep.
So many things.
I know.
So many things. But I love that, and I love what you're doing in that space. And thank you for supporting the women in all of our lives who are dealing with this and helping them find solutions for it. I love your mindset in terms of, living as long and thriving as long as possible biologically, but also staying emotionally, spiritually, and physiologically resilient in all stages of life, I think is so important. And unfortunately, we do look at things in isolation, and we're not isolated. There's not one part of our existence that is isolated from all of the rest of it. And unfortunately, it's like trying to decode a Rubik's Cube with 452 sides. Yes, everybody can have a voice in that conversation.
But really, there are 6 sides. Oh boy, that's the thing.
Exactly. But it feels like as we're constantly playing where one thing affects the next. But Zack, thank you so much for being with us here on Age Defiantly. And for those of you listening, I guarantee you that you're going to want to look down in the show notes and learn more about what Zack is doing. He did not encourage us to follow his social media, but I'm certain that there's a presence out there that we'll put links to that you can take a look.
And the book as well. We have a book as well.
I was getting there as well. And we're going to put links to his book. Give me the title of the book again.
It's The 3 Laws of Longevity.
The 3 Laws of Longevity. Looking forward to that read.
Yep.
As you can tell, I don't know.
I saw that, yeah.
This is only a fraction. So look for the 3 Laws of Longevity. Links are also down in the show notes, and we will see you next time on Age Defiantly.